Let's build a multifunctional miter saw stand. This entire thing is just over 10 feet long, allowing for 4-foot long cuts on the right and indefinitely long cuts on the left. When I remove the guides, there's a significant amount of workbench space. And with just a flip, there's now a sturdy stand for my scroll saw and belt sander with integrated dust collection. On the far right, I also have a great place to sand or spray paint indoors with a filtered dust collection intake. With so many features packed into such a small space, I'm maximizing valuable square footage inside my workshop. I started with measuring out the area and finalizing the design and layout. This workbench will be taller than normal, but lower than the outlets. I marked the height for the framing and used a long level to transfer that mark across the wall. It's going to intrude on the French cleats a bit, so I used a multi-tool to cut those portions away. The framing will be made out of 2x4s. I spent a while at Home Depot searching for the straightest boards I can find. Luckily, I found enough to make the tabletop frame. Then I added the portion that sticks out from the wall. In order to get the tops to be flush, I clamped on some guides. When adding the front, I used cut-off pieces to make a shelf to hold the front piece, and also clamped on some support legs to hold the frame level. I followed the exact same process for the other side. Since my floor is not flat, I took separate measurements for the length of each leg. I clamped the legs in place and spent quite a bit of time fine-tuning the heights to get the full length of the workbench to be perfectly level. I eyeballed it, used a long straight edge, and a long board to identify any portion that did not line up with the rest. When I was content, I punched pilot holes and drove in the screws to lock it in. The only way that I know something is secure is by climbing on it. So naturally, I need to eliminate any kind of potential wiggle from this workbench. The plywood top will eliminate the side-to-side racking, but it can still be lifted up like this. At each side piece, I added a 45-degree board. This makes a triangle and eliminates the potential for the bench to be lifted out of alignment. Next, I cut and added the plywood top. For the left side, the plywood is flush with the right, overhangs the left and the front with a few inches. For the right side, the plywood is flush with both sides and has an overhang in the front. The front overhang is consistent with both sides. Now it's time to build the platform for the miter saw. With the depth of the saw, I needed to make the platform just slightly longer than the top platform. That way, the saw can retract all the way and turn without issue. I used a combination square to get an accurate measurement of the height of the cut surface. This determines how far I need to drop the platform relative to the worktop. That measurement plus the thickness of the plywood allows me to mark my line for the top of the framing. 2 side pieces go on the tops, lining up exactly with the line. Precision with all of this is crucial so the miter saw cuts are accurate and square. Then I added a cross piece slightly behind the front, using guides to make sure the tops lined up. After adding this piece, I realized that the knot in the wood creates a bump. A few passes with the planer knocked that down. All the weight of the saw is held in the front. The back is just floating, so the plywood that's holding it doesn't go all the way back. I will add a piece there later for dust collection. You see that? That's why I was super meticulous with these steps. A perfectly flush saw to surface. Nice. Oh, and I left room on both sides of the saw. In the future, if I upgrade to a wider saw, there's still room for it. All I'd have to do is adjust the base up or down. The saw will be bolted to the platform. While centering it, I realized that the fence was out of alignment. When that was tuned and I was content with the saw's location, I drilled holes and bolted it to the platform. Now for one of the coolest features of this workbench. This disc and belt sander and scroll saw are very frequently used tools. I want them to be easily accessible with integrated dust collection, but also be able to be put away. I was recently introduced to a special hinge called a 5-knuckle hinge. This will allow the tool to swing up onto the surface and easily swing down underneath. When out of the way, the hinge is also out of the way, flush with the worktop, not interfering with long boards for the miter saw. These tools have to be mounted far enough away from the front edge for a few reasons. When they swing down, they have to clear the frame below. For the scroll saw, there will be dust collection below the front, so there needs to be room for that. I cut a piece of plywood large enough to hold the saw. I put it in place and marked all the points of interest: the outline of the saw, the mounting holes, and the location of the hole for dust collection. When in use, most of the dust goes straight down from the blade. I cut out that hole and punched holes for mounting. I used a spade to recess the holes underneath so the mounting bolts would not interfere. These hinges are just so unique looking. You can see how they swivel out of the way and are just perfect for the situation. Attaching them is really easy. 5 screws go on the top and 4 in the bottom. I'm amazed at how easy it is to swing this large tool into place. If you want to buy some 5-knuckle hinges for yourself, there'll be a link in the description.
That's really cool.
The sander took a little more figuring out. It's much wider and has dust collection integrated into the tool. I figured out that using a 2-inch flexible rubber coupling and a street elbow was the best way to make the turn to the workbench. I marked the holes to cut them out and got the sander attached to the base. Both of the tools got 2 5-knuckle hinges. When resting below, the center of balance causes the tools to stay swung out a bit. I made 2 paddles, one for each front leg, to hold them back underneath the workbench. Now I'm going to make extension guides for the miter saw. This will keep my cutting pieces square with the saw. This will be made up of 2 pieces of plywood with triangle supports. Down the road, I'll add a measuring tape and make a stop block for quick, accurate cuts. For now though, I inlaid some Rockler T-track into the front face. I used scrap half-inch plywood to make the triangle supports. Everything gets attached with glue and brad nails. Because the plywood edges are nice and straight, when lined up correctly, this structure is very reliably straight. I took my time and used a long straight edge to line up the miter guide with the miter saw. Now this is precision. When it was lined up, I punched in a few brad nails to hold it securely for the time being. Then I drilled half-inch holes for these large half-inch bolts. This does need to be easily removable, so while the bolts pressed into the holes are snugly fit, they are easy to pull out and remove the fence. I don't know if this will be the permanent solution for holding this in place, but it works for now. I followed the exact same steps to make another guide for the right side of the miter saw. This guide is shorter, only 3 feet, but the T-track extends towards the miter saw a bit. The tools on the left will be powered with a strip plug. I had to punch a hole to run the cables to the outlet. The strip plug is mounted to the wall underneath the workbench. With the tabletop tools plugged in, there's a bunch of excess wiring that needs to be tied up securely out of the way. This multifunctional station is really coming together. It easily transforms from a full-length miter saw station to a large workbench with easily access to other important tools. And we're not even done yet. There's still so much more to be jam-packed into this little space. Okay, that's it for now. See ya. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.